discussion. As it came up in the last session, you know, it's not always good to have just comfort. You know, you have to actually work for something, and we're making you work right now. Okay, so now we come to the session which deals with the dimension of AI and the common good. Our discussion looked at from the point of view of the social sciences, and in particular we focused on the question of the business sphere, which is a really important sphere. We've been talking about it quite a bit today. And we have really, I would say, one of the world experts on business and the common good with us here today. We're really, really honored, and I'm very, very, very happy that he's here. Alejo Sison holds appointments from the School of Economics at the University of Navarre and is accredited as a catedrático, that means the full professor, from the Spanish State University system. He's also a visiting ordinary professor at the Bush School of Business of the Catholic University of America, and adjunct professor at the McCourt School of Public Policy in Georgetown University. So these are his American appointments. He's also a senior research fellow at the Center for Business and Society at the IESE Business School, which, as you may know, according to Financial Times, is #3 in the ranking of the business schools in Europe. In 2019, he was elected to the board of the Society for Business Ethics and was its president from 2022 to 2023. He ranks among the top 2% of the world's researchers in applied ethics and business and management. His research deals with issues at the juncture of ethics, economics, and politics, with a focus on the virtues and the common good. His latest sole author book is Happiness and Virtue Ethics in Business, the Ultimate Value Proposition. How can you not be interested in a book with that title? In 2018, with 2 co-authors, he published Business Ethics, a Virtue Ethics and Common Good Approach, which is the first ever textbook for business ethics courses that is entirely based on an ethics of virtue and the common good. Now, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime, so he wrote it with 2 other guys. So he will speak to us on the topic, how can AI serve the common good through business? After which I will invite Father Pierre Januard, who is a professor of the history of economic thought in the Faculty of Social Sciences, to make a response, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. Please, Alejo.
Thank you very much for those kind words of introduction, Sister Helen. And thank you for such a generous invitation. You would recall that as soon as you sent me the email, within minutes, I immediately responded yes. It's not like you get an invitation to speak at the Angelicum, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, every day. Although shortly after sending yes, after hitting the button, I began to have second thoughts because I said, so the topic is about the common good, and Sister Helen will be part of the audience. Isn't this like selling honey to the beekeeper? Okay, so nonetheless, I managed to muster enough courage, so here I am. I'll be speaking about how can AI serve the common good. It says there of, but Sister Helen's suggestion was through. I think we would be able to manage that small difference through business. I divided my presentation in 2 parts in order to make it short and sweet. First, I'll begin with some preliminaries just for you to understand my point of departure, where I'm coming from. And later on, I would make some propositions. To call them claims sounds a bit too pretentious, probably. So this would be the destination, my response to that initial question. I'm putting aside all the intermediate steps because in the interest of time, but hopefully we'll be able to go through them, if not through Father Pierre's discussion, perhaps in the Q&A afterwards. Yeah. Okay. So regarding these preliminaries, these are all very basic definitions, but I think they're absolutely necessary for us to be on the same level ground. Okay, so I'll begin with the definition of the good, inspired in Aristotle, inspired in Thomas, perhaps couched in more contemporary terms that would be acceptable, for instance, to a business or an econ audience. Okay, so the good is the object of an inclination, a tendency, or a desire that at the same time perfects human nature. So here you see a double movement, an outward movement, sense of attraction towards the good, and an inward movement that perfects human nature. I'm, of course, presupposing an essentialist account of human nature, of humans as political animals, as social animals. In business classes, in econ classes, students would prefer the use of the term preferences, yeah? But of course, the thing with preferences is that it's not subject to any rational scrutiny, because each individual is entitled completely to their own preference, and that's it. Okay, so you lose that ethical mooring or grounding in an essentialist reading of nature. What is the common good then? Having defined the good, let us proceed with what the common good is. What I present here is a formal definition of the conditions that have to be satisfied in order for a good to be common. Yeah? I'm saying it can be achieved if and only if all the members of the community achieved it at the same time. Okay, so think of the victory of a sports team in football. Yeah, the whole team wins, despite the fact that not each and every member scores a goal. As a matter of fact, not everyone in the team is actually playing on the pitch. Nonetheless, the goal, the end, is absolutely shared by each and every member of the team. The same thing happens with an orchestra playing a piece of music. Yeah? Each musician have their own instrument, but they're all playing according to the same music sheet. The orchestra conductor is not playing an instrument, at least is not making any sound. However, their role is vital in interpreting the piece correctly. Yeah? So, all members achieve the good if and only if each and every other member of the collective achieves it at the same time. Again, in econ business terms, it's what you would call a public good, meaning it is non-rivalrous, not zero-sum, and not excludable. Not excludable. You cannot deprive any member of the collective from participating in that good. In other words, it's something that's not chopped up and distributed, but something that is intimately shared. It's like telling a joke. Why do I tell people a joke? Because I want to share the mirth, the fun with each and every one. Yeah? It's exactly the same thing. Or why do we tell our friends about our sorrows? Because if the sorrow is shared, it's somehow mitigated. Yeah? So it's an object of sharing, not something to be divided and distributed. Now, each collective has their own common good that creates and sustains them. Let's just think of families, marriages and families, the common good of which is the procreation of the offspring, their education, and mutual help among the family members. Okay? Let's move on. When we think of the common good, what we first of all imagine is the common good of the political community. It would be, you might say, the main analog of the common good, eudaimonia or flourishing, which happens to be the object of politics, that body of knowledge or science focused on achieving the common good. I'm going to provide you a very bare bones account. So if eudaimonia or flourishing were the roof, it needs to be supported by at least two pillars. One of the pillars of which is ethics, concerned with the internal goods necessary for flourishing. Constitutive, but only partially constitutive of flourishing. This is what sort of differentiates Aristotelians from Stoics. For Stoics, virtue alone is sufficient to achieve flourishing. Of course, we're talking about Stoicism, several centuries, several authors, but generally I think this is a feature that they all share. Whereas for Aristotle, virtue is very important, but is not sufficient to achieve flourishing. What else do we need? Since we are rational political animals, we also need external goods, and that is the remit of the economy. The economy provides us with the necessary external goods that we need in order to flourish. Now then, the economy in itself could be divided into two fundamental activities. The first of which is use or consumption of those material goods. Yeah? It is sad to say that in modern economic science, this activity has practically disappeared. Why so? Because if you've achieved any product, any good, legally, meaning without causing anyone else undue harm, you're absolutely free to use or abuse it. We have nothing else to say. Yeah? And this happens with preferences, of course. This consideration of the proper use or abuse of things, proper use of things rather, with a view to flourishing has completely disappeared. And what do we have left? The only thing we have left is that second fundamental activity, which is the provision or acquisition of those goods. Kind of makes sense. Before you use or enjoy or consume a good, you have to acquire it or provide it first, right? So this is the only activity that is left. The acquisition or provision of these external goods, also known as chromatistics originally. Yeah? And here is where business would come in. Here is where business would come in. It's the acquisition or provision of the external goods that we need in order to flourish outside of the confines of the household, right? Because a household is, to survive, but in order to flourish, we need something more than mere survival. There are lots of activities that we cannot engage in within the confines of our home, yeah? So basically, this is business. Business is dedicated to creating, producing the goods that we need in order to flourish. So as you can see, there are sort of internal limits, yeah? Because if we produce more than what we actually need, we could consume or make use of it badly, and there's always that natural limit which is established by our flourishing, okay? Now, what is the common good of business? If business consists in the production of the goods we need in order to flourish, well, the common good of business is nothing else than work in common. It's the work that we engage in collaboratively in order to produce the goods or services that we need. So imagine if I thought that in order to flourish, I needed to go to Mars or to go to the moon, I'd have to build a rocket, right? If I did it all by myself, nearly impossible, because I won't have the resources, nor will I have the expertise. So what do I have to do? I have to convince other people to invest the resources, the know-how, etc. And hopefully, by working together in common, seeking that common goal, yes, we will be able to achieve it. Yeah? So it's collaborative production of goods and services. It's work in common. Now, we know from the encyclical, amongst other things, Pope St. John Paul II, Laborem Extensions, that all work, yes, has this double dimension, right? So it's work in common, the production of goods and services, insofar as it has that double dimension. On the one hand, the objective dimension, which refers to the tangible goods, products, including profits. If you produce things efficiently and you sell them to the market and people like them because they're able to satisfy their needs and their desires, you will obtain a profit. Yes, so all of those things refer to the objective dimension of the common good. But there's this other dimension, which is the subjective dimension. The knowledge, skills, habits, and virtues that you develop in and through work. And all he says in laboratory sessions is consider these two dimensions and ensure the priority of the subjective over the objective dimension. Why? Because the subjective dimension can never be separated from the workers or the agents. That's all it means. And then later on, we could sort of flesh out a bit more, probably if we had time, about the way the different stakeholders participate in the common good of business, work in common. Yeah? Take, for instance, investors, or stock or shareholders, right? Well, there's such a thing called the prohibition of money laundering. What does that mean? You have to think about where you invest. Yeah? And when you're taking in investments, you have to know where the money's coming from. This happens with all banks. Imagine if all of a sudden I went to a bank branch and decided, well, I'm going to deposit probably $500,000. Wait a minute, Mr. Sison, we have to do some due diligence here and know exactly where that money is coming from. So there's such a thing as responsible investment, the prohibition of money laundering. Okay. And at the same time, you could also say, as consumers, there's responsible consumption, ethical consumption. Well, after all, we could sort of boycott or patronize certain products and services. These are all ethical decisions that we make as consumers. Yeah? And there, as between competitors or suppliers, there's such a thing as the ethical supply chain, right? Yeah? So there are auditors which ensure that there's no child labor involved, that environmental standards are kept, so forth and so on, or fair trade. Yeah? Fair trade. So in a given sector, say in cocoa or in sugar, all the small producers, they come together and say, we're going to do a bit of storytelling, we'll learn how to market our products even better, so much so that people perceive that value and they're willing to pay more, for instance. Yeah? And other stakeholders would have their role, the government in terms of subsidiarity, employers, what they call organizational citizenship behavior, which is going over and beyond what is written in my contract. Yeah? Because if I sort of limited myself exclusively to what the contract states, well, that is tantamount to a strike. Yeah? The organization will not function. Because there are lots of things that we do gratuitously, yeah, which are essential to the proper functioning of the organization, which is, after all, human. Okay, so business, by virtuous work, could contribute to the common good of the political community. Yeah? In that sort of layered, structured sort of way. Now, how can AI serve the common good? AI can serve the common good insofar as it enables virtuous work. Sorry. Not yet. Let me see. Is that it? Yeah. Okay. No, there's something missing. Yeah. Okay. So far as it enables virtuous work. I'm drawing here from the research of an author named Ben Schneiderman, who's based at University of Massachusetts, Rockland, although he's retired right now. And he develops the idea of human-centered AI, as opposed to technology-centered AI. How does he come about with this idea? He says, normally, when we think of AI automation, we think in terms of a single dimension. This morning, they spoke about self-driving cars, right? So the Society of Automotive Engineers, they would go from 0 to 5. 0 meaning everything has to be done by the driver themselves, whereas 5 is a fully self-driving car. So in between, what you have is probably braking assistance, parking assistance, making sure that you stay in your own lane. So there are different levels of automation. So it's 0 and 5. It's a zero-sum game. Either the humans, drivers, do everything, or the vehicle does everything. What he suggests, however, is that we think in terms of two dimensions. Human control and automation. Yeah? So what you have is a quadrant. And the upper right-hand side of the quadrant, there is a possibility of having at the same time human control, high human control, and high levels of automation. What's the example for this sort of technology? The cameras on our cell phones. The cameras on our cell phones. Thanks to those cameras, people who don't have a clue about photography, such as myself, were able to come up with pictures that were pretty decent, you know, for my social media feeds, to share with friends and family. Why? Because there are all sorts of filters and AI already baked into the product. Nonetheless, it's still I, the human, who decides what to shoot, when, and how. And then later on, with Adobe Photoshop, you know, I could sort of enhance the picture, so forth and so on. So I think this is the most interesting area for human-computer interaction. Yeah? High human control and high levels of automation, clearly at the service of humans. Okay? So the human-centered AI paradigm as compared to the technocratic paradigm, efficiency for efficiency's sake, for the sake of the technology itself. Here are some very basic differences. First, in terms of the purpose or the why. In human-centered AI, it's all about augmentation, enhancement, empowerment, amplification of human capacities. First and foremost, intelligence. Whereas in the technology-centered AI, it's all about imitation and emulation. Not only imitating human beings, but going beyond human beings, surpassing us. But what is the net benefit there, frankly? Imagine you're at the airport. Do you really need a humanoid greeter if all you need is information about the boarding day? So probably it's best to be using, you know, a touch screen. A touch screen. It's more efficient, right? So sometimes you have all these bells and whistles which actually do not contribute to the benefit of the technology. It's just confusing. It's just confusing. And there's research on that. I mean, for instance, when are you interested in a mechanical chatbot in delivering bad news? In delivering bad news, for instance, like your mortgage application has been denied and that sort of thing. Why? Because it sounds less intentional and it sort of softens the pain. Yeah? So, augmentation versus imitation. In the human-centered AI paradigm, it's clear that AI is a tool. And the question then becomes, how do I use this tool properly? Whereas if we adopted a technology-centered AI perspective, AI could be like a competitor. We anthropomorphize AI. We're hardwired to do this because, you know, it's essential to human beings to use language. And whenever you see something that's talking to you in the same way that any other human being could, you can't help it but think there must be something human there. So it hacks our operating system, whether we like it or not. Yeah? So anthropomorphism. Of course, again, there could be some benefits. It's easier to use the technology if you could actually talk to it, right? So one thing with ChatGPT is you could do programming without knowing anything about programming languages. Okay, so because it could deal with natural language processing. Yeah, so it makes it easier, but then, I mean, it's always a double-edged sword, or two-faced Janus. So if we anthropomorphize AI, we could perceive it as a threat, not only as artificial general intelligence, but as super intelligence, so forth and so on. Yeah, so all this way down the transhumanist sort of current. And how? One is human control and automation. The digital camera example versus autonomy and co-agency. Autonomy, automated lethal automatic weapon systems, for instance, which would be an aberration. That would be an aberration. We already have the capacity, it's there, and I think, or rather not say, but some countries apparently have used them already. However, yeah, having the capacity is not the same as actually using it in an environment, like letting go of it in the wild. That is within our power. That's something different. Autonomy and co-agency. I think we should all resist. Whenever they say, okay, it's going to be your co-pilot, your co-agent, you're going to be a centaur, you're going to be a cyborg. police, right? I mean, we human beings are not the same as machines. There's an essential difference there. And it would be demeaning, degrading of human beings to be co-whatever, yeah? And then later on, I mean, you could go on, I mean, how do you properly use it? You could take recourse to the triple font theory regarding what is the object. Remember that AI is always dual use, yeah? So you'd be very hard-pressed to think of an intrinsically evil use for AI. Probably the closest would be if you were sufficiently aware, there's certain things that AI cannot do. For instance, predict criminal behavior, okay? So in that sense, it's basically, you know, snake oil. So do not use it to predict human behavior, which is free, because it just doesn't work for those things, yeah? And the intention. This reminds me, when I was using textbooks, sometimes they'd have answer keys at the back in your math textbooks, right? So you could sort of check the answer key once you've done the problem, or you could go straight away, check the answer without doing the problem yourself in order to submit an assignment. So these are the, intentional options, yeah? So with regard to AI, is it helping in directly coming up with an output, or is it helping me sort of go step by step in order to reach the correct response? And the circumstances. As a parent, if I were hard-pressed in order to give my child like a bedtime story, I may ask AI, and that's it. Yeah? Of course, the best thing would be for me to actually sort of try and imagine a different bedtime story each time, but I don't have the time. It's bedtime already, and you know, it gets me out of the fix. Sorry. Lastly, I'm sorry. I think what happened here? Yeah. Okay. Here is where I will end.
Just put it on full screen again.
Full screen again. Yeah. So we speak of AI as if they're one thing. Actually, it's a collection of technologies. It's a constellation of technologies. And it all begins with a misnomer. 1956, John McCarthy, he asks for a grant in order to solve the problem of complex data processing. That's all it is, complex data processing. Now, with such an unsexy title, you'll never get past first base, right? So reviewers will say, complex data processing, rejected. However, he said, let's call it AI, and the rest is history. So AI is actually complex data processing. Nothing more, nothing less. The idea is that for certain activities, take for granted performing mathematical operations, translating from one language to another, we'd think you need human-level intelligence in order to do this. But lo and behold, this could be done mechanically. The Chinese have been using the abacus to perform mathematical operations for thousands of years. It never occurred to them to call it AI, although it could very well be called AI, yeah? And we mentioned Google Translate. It's the same thing. We thought initially that you'd have to learn one language and then the other, and then exercise, you know, sort of practice translating from one language. But this could be done statistically, yeah? Okay, so what is AI? AI is a new efficient cost. It's a new mode of production. How do you produce diamonds, geological forces in nature, or in the lab, with heat, with pressure, etc.? In terms of the product itself, could you distinguish a fake diamond from a naturally produced one? Apparently you can't. You have to be very specialized gemologist in order to do that. You can't, right? So think right now, regarding the outputs that we expect from AI, are we interested in the process or just the outcome? Why is it that since calculators are ubiquitous, we still insist that students learn to perform mathematical operations mentally? Why? Because what we're interested is in the process, not just the outcome. Right? So it's a new efficient cost, a new mode of production. Yeah? How does it do it? Statistically, simulating, mimicking intelligence. It does not think, it does not abstract, it doesn't know anything about anyone. These are all data points. It doesn't care. Data points. So you think fluid mechanics could help you, how do substances flow, but it also tell you, so I have a crowd, and they're going to pass through this road. What would be the best way? It doesn't care. It doesn't care. So let's not be taken in by the metaphors that we use. It's an entirely different process, although it produces the same outcome. And why we should normalize AI as technology. I'm taking this from Arvind Narayana. I think it was referred to by Gabor earlier. Normalize AI as technology. As technology, why do we use it? To make work easier, faster, and at scale. But at the same time, let us be mindful of the de-skilling process whenever we use it. I'm going to stop here. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, dear Professor Sison, Alejo. Thank you for your all the points you have you brought. Now, I will just stress or maybe highlight two points or two steps of your presentation that I think they are very important and very useful. And after that, I will ask 3 questions just to extend and to help to discuss maybe and to go further. The first point I want to highlight is that you define the common good. Quite often we use the word common good, but we do not define it. We do not precise what it means. And even in Aquinas' works, sometimes he uses, but he doesn't explain everywhere. So it's important to have this definition you give. It's I think it's useful, and you say it's a common good is an object of inclination, tendency, or desire, or something that perfects humans and that can be achieved if all members of a group achieve it. So I think it's important. The 3 parts of the phrase, the sentence, I think the 3 parts are important for the what is further. The common good is therefore something that is achieved together. Everyone works together to achieve it. So I think it's important that what you say, that the common good is not only the effect, the result, but also the process. We'll see, and I think it's very very important what you say there. The emphasis here is on the process, the common action, rather than or also with the end, which would be the common good, even if we can assume that it motivates this common action. So the end is the thing that motivating us, but in fact the process, I think it's important, and it's good that you say that. Now let's have a look more precisely on business and on the business approach. There is a common good if there is a kind of doing together. If we do together, if we make together, there is a collaboration with everybody to achieve a good. And it's very important in business, in the way a company will work and everybody in the company will work together to achieve a good. Business is a work of common good, not, or at least in this perspective, not just because it satisfies a universal need, not because that we are making something that is useful for everybody, but because of the mode of production. And this mode of production mobilizes the common good. So a production approach that emphasizes social relations and the cohesion of stakeholders in production, I think that is what you bring here, and it's very important. This is an approach to economic activity based on the very interest of producing in a certain way, even before the need is met. So the focus is on the production. This approach is echoed in social enterprise, for example, for integration of vulnerable or disabled people. It's very important. This kind of enterprises or companies, they are not just working to make something, but to help people to work together and to give them their dignity and something that is much more important than the thing they will fabricate, they will make together. So 3 questions, maybe. Is common good, is common good in business a bonum arduum? The notion of bonum arduum is coming from Thomas Aquinas. It is a good that is arduous, difficult, accessible, so it may be achieved, and future. And for Aquinas, it is the object of hope. And so Thomas does not apply it to economy or to economics. But in fact, he applies it very allusively to work. But the Pope, John Paul II, uses this notion of bonum arduum when he talks about labor and work in Laborem Exercens, and in one of your paper you mention it, and John Paul II says that for Thomas work is a bonum arduum. In fact, in Aquinas it's not very clear, but I think it's more a position of the Pope John Paul. But I think it's very important for us, because this notion of bonum arduum may be very useful in economics, not only for labor and work, but for all the economic activity. And why? Because the notion of the arduous good accounts for economic activity by combining both risk and scarcity. And both are key notions in economics. And why do I talk about bonum arduum here? Is that because, in fact, so does the activity that implements the common good, because it is an economic activity. Business is an economic activity, so business trying to achieve the common good is an economic activity, so it has the same dimensions, in fact. And common good in business is perhaps even more of bonum arduum than other economic activities, because it is possible but not certain, and that is a good in common, and to be a common good, maybe it's more difficult, it's more arduous. So I think this notion may be interesting to enlighten this idea of common goods in business or through business. The second point, I will continue, is how can AI contribute to the bonum arduum, that is the common good in business. Today, AI in management is often not used for the common good. We know that. Instead, it is used to spy on employees, to make them compete with each other, to assess individual productivity. So maybe not for something that can be identified to common good. However, what you say and what you show is that it is possible to encourage cooperative game and help overcome the difficulty of serving the common good in business. Some points. AI can aggregate everything that stakeholders consider to be a good. Maybe we don't know exactly what a common good is. So maybe AI may help us to at least to put together what everybody considers as a good. AI can facilitate communication so that every word spoken is audible to the other by stimulating it positively. It is not a question of translation, just linguistic translation. We know the softwares of translations, but it's not just that. Translation, it's also a translation of recognition, acknowledgement. Managers are not always very good at finding the right words and gestures in companies. Everybody can see that, experience that, and everyone has their own language. You know, maybe for the priests who prepare people to marriage, or for the one who have prepared their own marriage, you know maybe the book Love Languages, and it's not only for the families. It's the same thing in every relations, in every relation in companies too, to find a way to talk to each other, to talk with the good language. And maybe AI may be useful for this, to translate not the linguistic sentences, but the point of view from one to each other. And also, we can go from surveillance to support. AI is used to spy on people, but maybe it may be used to help people. Learning to do a task in case of error, so maybe the computer will see that you are not very good when you at work, but maybe it will help you. And instead of pointing at that you are a bad employee, detecting some personal difficulty and to accompany it, to help you if the computer sees that you have some difficulties, maybe professional or personal, maybe the computer may see that in watching what you are doing at work. So the third point is that could use of AI itself become a common good? AI can then become a common good in the production process, a good that benefits all stakeholders and is desired by all. So it doesn't involve produce fear, but desire. AI must be, in this case, configured and controlled by all for the good of all. And it is able to contribute to the dignity of labor and work. It may support, redeeming shortcomings through learning, detecting people and professional difficulties, support solutions. And the other point is to the recognition in the language that suits everybody, everyone. The last point is that another facet of the common good is present in business. Here we focus on the process of the production process, but there is also the issue of the good produced for the common use with a consumption approach of business. And production may be seen as a response to a need. So maybe AI makes it possible to identify the common needs. Thank you very much.
for the bonum arum. Okay, yes, absolutely. The bonum arum. Oftentimes when you speak of the bonum arum, if I remember correctly, it's been quite a while since we studied these terms. And during business school, you haven't had that much time to sort of review and learn them. So, bonum arum refers to a difficult good, and oftentimes it's contrasted with the pleasurable goods. Okay? The goods of pleasure versus the goods which entail certain difficulty. And each one of them have their own sources of virtue. For instance, for the difficult goods, it's basically courage, perhaps, whereas for the goods of pleasure, it's moderation. It's moderation. Yes, and another feature of bonum arum is that it's located in the future. Yeah, that is the object of hope, something that you expect. Whereas the goods of pleasure are in the present. So, is work as a common good of bonum arum? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. However, there are a few sort of nuances that I'd like to introduce, because oftentimes, in the understanding of work at least, it is proposed basically as a way to avoid sin. Okay? The idea like consistently praying, participating in the sacraments, etc. And since you can't be doing that every day, right? Well, the next best option would be to work. Because at least, what they always say, I don't answer that there's a next workshop. So if you're working, at least you're not sinning. When you're working, you're not sinning. Yeah. No. So I look at it in a more positive spin. Work is not simply a way of avoidance. Yeah? But rather, work is a way of developing virtue. Virtue in and through work. So I suppose you know where I'm coming from. Yeah? In your ordinary activities. Yeah? You don't have to do something out of the ordinary in order to be virtue. And virtue is not exclusively when you perform acts of charity. No. In your everyday life, you could look for virtue. Yeah? Work. Yes. And the second, this whole idea would it be less harmful? AI would make work less harmful. Again, of course. But this is a double-edged sword. Sometimes things become too easy. It becomes too easy, and it becomes too easy, it becomes addictive. It becomes addictive. And it does not contribute to human flourishing, rather it hinders. Remember, we always have human flourishing as the reference point. So, AI is best used as a decision support system, not a decision-making system. So it should always refer to the decision to the humans, because after all, AI cannot take on any responsibility for reasons that have already been discussed in the same group. We cannot assume any responsibility, therefore it doesn't make sense to sort of throw the responsibility to AI. Yeah? So sometimes it helps to introduce friction. You really want to do this, for instance, because these would be the consequences. Or instead of telling you what to do, you tell AI. So I've seen all of these sort of images, and I think that this is this sort of cancer, for instance. Then AI will generate some sort of adversarial thinking. Have you considered this? Have you considered that? Are you sure it's not the same as this other kind of cancer? That's when AI will be most helpful. Yeah. So I find in terms of large language models, there's this heuristic which I often share with my students. Three questions. First of all, does the truth matter? We know that AI is indifferent with regard to the truth. Does the truth matter? If the truth doesn't matter, go ahead and use AI. If it does, second point. Are you capable of verifying the truth value of the output? Either by yourself or by consulting with other people who are knowledgeable than you. Okay? So the onus is on us to determine whether Are you willing to take responsibility for the output? Because it's no longer yours. Only then should you go ahead and use it. And then lastly, the question about, I think it's about access and exclusion regarding technology. It works both ways, as always. For instance, it's very helpful that AI knowledge and design, they think of this motion. They think of the least advantage when you're designing technology to make it more inclusive. Take for granted, I think all of us, we're all using audiobooks. But those audiobooks were first designed for people who are deaf, but now it benefits everyone. Okay, so inclusive design sort of paves the way for the technology to be actually serving the common good. So thank you very much for all for giving me this opportunity to explain further.
Thank you again. Well, we're actually ending our time, but we have a half an hour break, so it's not going to be learning lesson or white class in front of you. Yeah, and then of course you can talk to Professor Sison during the break as well. It's over here. It's over here. We'll just have this one question and then we'll break.
One question is more of a reflection on what we read this morning and also the reaction to the presentation. The idea that AI can be designed to be a common good. AI could be designed in order to be a common good, like design, like an infrastructure. And it brings back to the idea of how we design the tool. So maybe we can, do you think that we should be more focused on not defining object in the tools, but on how people will access and use it? I always thought it was quite interesting that OpenAI at the beginning was a non-profit corporation. The Communitas, the parent company of Facebook, is developing an AI model that's supposed to be open source. So the idea that we can create a sort of public AI, the way we public infrastructure like highways or internet itself. So the idea of having a sort of human rights to have access to AI. In order to serve the common good that will be outside this period.
Well, yes, I think actually there are suggestions from the human-centered AI framework. There are suggestions there. Human-centered AI, it's agnostic with regard to the virtue. So you need a bit of tweaking in order for it to serve your purposes. If you think that the virtues are the way actually to achieve flourishing and well-being and the common good. What it has are, it pays particular concern to fundamental human rights. Yeah, of course, that's just the baseline of human flourishing. It's not excellence. It's just ensuring that people are not unduly harmed. Yeah. So I said earlier, AI is a collection of technologies. Apart from that, there's also a workflow. So AI, you start off with data. You start with data gathering. You start with data cleaning. You start with data labeling. Yeah. So all of that is infused with biases already. What I want to point out there is that you need virtues both in the design, in the deployment, and in the use of AI. So each would have their own. These are all different